Today I'd like to talk about the process behind the latest painting I made, which is called SHA'AGAEVAR. This is a character from the story I wrote about 2 years ago. Starting here with just doodling away using the symmetry tool in Procreate. It's just a very relaxing way for me to sketch faces. The downside of it, of course, being that you end up with just perfect symmetry that will end up looking uncanny. Playing around with the idea of having her with bright light coming from under her hair and figuring out the anatomy. Adding the body to the head, already starting to break that symmetry up by turning the torso away from the viewer. Definitely wanted to start with a bust, ended up making a full body shot. Not something I do very often with full color painting, but hoping to break out of the comfort zone. Working through the hand anatomy separately from the body helps me have a clear focus on where the fingers should be and whatnot. So continuing with the anatomy, it's not my strongest suit, so references definitely help. In this case, I looked at pictures of a statue I found, which was great help figuring out how it all should look like together. After a quick attempt at starting with color, I decided to switch to the grayscale approach. It's a great way to have control of your values, but will definitely lead to muddy colors later on. It's definitely not a universally perfect approach, but I like it. I used a scene with a 3D model of a head with the light sources positioned right behind the neck as a reference for this. It's a very unrealistic lighting setup, but doing a character piece means that the main focus should be on the face, usually. So having that high contrast that comes from a light setup positioned behind the head would just not achieve that goal. Coming back to the idea of that very uncanny perfect symmetry, I suppose I can say that SHA'AGAEVAR is a celestial being, so that uncanniness definitely adds to the vibe, but it is something that you should definitely keep in mind if you're playing around with the symmetry tool, because it will look weird, as it does here, actually. I prefer merging down layers as I work, and surprisingly enough the sketch survived this particular process, so I am constantly turning it on, overlaid on top of the rest, just to see if everything's where it's supposed to be. So here I am rendering the drapery, the way the dress flows, coming into this with absolutely no plan for the composition, which I would say is a mistake, but sometimes it is what it is. My general art process is very much just throw stuff at the canvas, see what sticks, and roll with it. I get distracted a lot. Here I'm playing with the idea of adding a frame. Definitely something I will abandon later, because, well, if you have a lot of plans and you have a lot of ideas, you might end up just burning out before you can finish the painting. And a finished painting is better than a perfect one that just doesn't exist, so. My personal issue is definitely the fact that I tend to overwork and over-render pieces, thinking that it makes them better, and my work definitely suffers from it because it just starts to lack character, lack some flow, some sketchiness to it, and I'm definitely hoping to get better at it in the future. Embrace the just sort of unfinished messiness of things. Beginning with the color, one of the ways to counteract the muddiness in my experience is to just sort of throw in the color wash, make the grayscale, well, less gray, and then just continue tweaking the colors as you go. One of the biggest mistake I would say was to just merge the figure with the background so early on. Definitely had a lot of problems later trying to render the space around her. So here trying to break that symmetry, playing around with hair shapes and the flow of the strands. Gonna do a lot of work on the left side and then just leave the right side for later. Playing with the idea of her having a sort of glow around her. This took about 24.5 hours and I started it back in March. By the time of me recording this, it's November. So that glow idea, I just forgot about it completely. Maybe for the best. Still hoping to have a frame. Not going to happen. Playing around with ideas for the background. Again, if I had a plan for this, this would have been so much easier, but alas. Really having fun with the hair. I suppose the main approach with drawing stylized hair is to treat it as if it's a number of ribbons. I might be wrong, but I know that in 3D sculpting they use the same logic. And then you just add the hair patterns into it. It's an entire topic that I'm afraid I can't describe just in voiceover. It's a tedious process, but it's kind of fun. That can be said about a lot of painting. This is where I decided to change the foot and the hands. I suppose the original figure was seated, so I decided that it would be weird if a floating one would have their foot like that. And I also decided that the hand apparently just does not look right to me anymore, and I changed it. I'm still unsure if it looks better now, but that's just not for me to decide anymore. Throwing in that sort of nebula texture on the dress, adding notes for myself just to know what needs to be worked on. This definitely helps not zeroing in on one part of the painting and just abandoning the rest. I know that happens to me when I do faces. So having this sort of to-do list is a great help. Still playing around with the shape of the drapery. One of my favorite things to do is to just throw weird colors on top and then play around with layer blending modes to see what jumps out. Here I was desperately trying to figure out the background by just throwing photo textures, photo brushes. It doesn't work very well with the stylized painting style, which was my main concern, and that's why it didn't end up being the final version. But it was a way to find that final solution for me. And here I am getting to it, just smudging out shapes. I would say that a lot of the things that I end up painting is a product of stuff that I've seen, which is true about a lot of people. I think the whole vibe of this is definitely inspired by the Moon and Star series by Mucha. Iconic. So here I am just again adding layers, seeing what parts of the painting need more depth, what parts need more color. You just see where it takes you to, what works and what doesn't. Finally finishing up that right side of the hair and just some final touches. I like to throw in a noise layer on top and just sort of add some texture to it, and it's subtle enough not to be distracting. I also added a slight chromatic aberration effect. This is something you definitely shouldn't overdo, as it will make the image look quite off. Thank you so much for listening to this video. I hope you have a great day.